So the ultimate goal of our landscaping services is to create miniature wildernesses, to create areas, whether it's on a residential garden, whether it's across a commercial property, or whether it's in a community green space, that reflect the potential natural vegetation, the potential native vegetation of that area. So the way we would approach that is we would look at just how unique that local ecosystem is. We're in the Forest of Arden at the moment, a woodland that's representative of the Forest of Arden, and it has a very different feel to the vegetation that is present just 30 miles away in Leicester, which is in the Charnwood Forest. So what I'd be looking at is creating miniature wildernesses in this area that reflect this woodland, very much the species collection, the guild of species that you'd have that are local to this area. Whereas if I was working on a site over towards Leicester, we perhaps look at a focus that is closer to the Charnwood collection of species, and that's not something that's really that common across landscaping. We tend to focus on what plants look good, and there's plants and trees and shrubs in native environments that are stunning. They look brilliant and they look great when you put them in the right collection, and that collection of them work well together. So we're focused on creating a collection of species in these areas that reflect the local environment, because they do better in that local environment, and that then reduces maintenance. So that's another issue that we focus on, and it's one of the things that set us apart. We do provide a maintenance service, but my thoughts behind that are, if you're seeing us regularly on a maintenance service, we perhaps haven't done the best that we can in getting the environment the way it should, because the natural environment sustains itself really well. It doesn't mean it doesn't need any management at all. So occasional maintenance is going to be needed. But if we've built a miniature wilderness in your space really well, then the maintenance costs and the maintenance energy needs and the maintenance water needs will all be significantly reduced, and that's core to the way we approach that. When it comes to doing things like maintenance or the creation of the wilderness, we schedule the work, and we schedule it in a way that works with the environment. There are times of the year that it is better to plant trees and prune trees, so we wouldn't do a lot of pruning work and a lot of coppicing type work in the summer months. In fact, we wouldn't do any coppicing work at all during the summer. We'd focus on tree planting and on our pruning operations. Really, it's November now, from this point forward through till late February, early March, because that's the time that it's best for the environment. In the same way as when we were doing soil restoration, we would target the times of the year that is most appropriate to do that work, and that reduces the impact that we have. We don't tend to use much in the way of heavy equipment. There's times we can't avoid the use of chainsaws and brush cutters and those sort of things, but we're going to do a lot of that landscaping work with hand tools. And yes, it does take a lot more physically to do that, but that approach has a significantly lower impact on the environment than if we were bringing in any kind of heavy machinery. So we have that as a focus. We want to reduce the impact of the way we carry out our landscaping operations. And I think the final thing is, we build our native ecosystems quite literally from the ground up. A huge part of the way we approach things is getting the soil right. Quite often in urban environments, the soil isn't reflective of what should be there in the native environment, in the natural environment. So we will do a lot of soil surveying, soil science work to restore the soil on the site back to what it should be, to really benefit the native vegetation that we then plant and develop in that. And the end result of all of that is that we create a system that is self-sustaining in a very short amount of time. It requires very little in the way of maintenance, and it is developed with the main purpose that we are attracting local species, local native species of pollinators, of bird life to that, which essentially then develops the ecosystem on its own to be a really full, functional ecosystem on a very small scale. We can really do that from a few square meters right the way up to eventually across the landscape scale. Systems thinking is really a strategic level approach to management. It almost sits above our other management practices, things like lean and agile and Six Sigma and all of those management practices. They're all excellent, they're all great ways of managing situations, but systems thinking sits above that at a strategic level of how we approach big picture kind of stuff. And it really forces you to understand that whatever we do is integrated to other areas. So if we're a business, we still have to link into our political systems, our economic systems, our social systems, and the natural world, all of which are complex systems. So we would ideally approach our understanding of all of those systems that sit around business through systems thinking. It's the best way of understanding how they function and what their structure is. Business can be a complex adaptive system, it's not always, but systems thinking means that we're understanding how our businesses connect with those complex systems. So when we're dealing with a client and getting them to think about how their environmental management plans go, system thinking makes us integrate with all of those other areas. It doesn't draw a boundary around the business and say this is what we're managing. It says this is what we're managing, but it's deeply connected outside and it has complexity within its business. One of the ways that we'd approach that, I've already mentioned that it's ideal to have an almost unreasonable, impossible vision for the environment. And I think that's an essential part of systems thinking. When you are building your strategic vision, start off with something that is absolutely enormous. It doesn't matter if you can't achieve it. If you don't think it, you're not going to get on the path to achieving it. So start with something that's absolutely enormous and then bring this back down to actionable points, actionable goals that you can do. Systems thinking, you start with observation, you start with really understanding how things are at the moment, and that's not dissimilar to most of the strategic practices, but you build flexibility, you build adaptability, and you build resilience into a systems thinking strategy. They're inherent in it, which isn't always the case with other approaches to management. So in working with our clients, we will encourage integration across their operations. We'll encourage collaboration with their community, so that could be their business community. If you look at most businesses that are on a business park, for example, there are other industries around them that could probably benefit from things that are waste products from their industry, or they can potentially engage with other clients across their business park, their business community, to look at how the business park green spaces are integrated with each other. So that's the sort of thinking that we'd encourage, is integration and collaboration across their operations and with operations that are potentially external to their business. I think that's a key focus for a systems thinking strategy. I'm going to really answer this in two parts. I'm going to focus firstly on the more commercial side of things, which is the systems thinking training and that side of things, and then I'll look at the nature awareness as a separate side of things. So on systems thinking, we're going to start with understanding what is complexity, what is a complex system, what's a complex adaptive system such as the natural environment, and how are other sectors also complex adaptive systems. So our political systems are complex adaptive systems. We're going to look at what the structure and the function and the processes that take place within a complex system are, so that we can understand how we can then manage them. And essentially we're going to learn that you can't really manage complexity. What you are actually trying to do is leverage it. You're trying to find ways to change the behavior of a complex system, whether it's your business system, whether it's the natural environment. You're trying to change the way it's behaving through leverage. And the way we're going to approach that is then through a systems thinking toolbox. And examples of that, I'm not going to go into every aspect of that toolbox, but the baseline for all of that is something called the Boyd loop, or the OODA loop, which is observe, orient, decide, act. Unlike other decision-making processes, this one is a continuous process. It's not one that you sort of look at the end of a project and think, what did I do and how can I change it? This is an ongoing process. So at every stage of a project, at every stage of building your strategy, you are thinking, what am I seeing? What does this mean? How can I use that knowledge to change this system that I'm dealing with? Other parts of the toolbox, we don't necessarily focus on typical SMART goals. SMART goals, they're great, they're brilliant for very linear systems, for very linear processes. But when you have a very changing environment, whether it's the natural environment or the business environment, we'd prefer to use something called a PACT goal, which is purpose, action, continuity and tracking. And those PACT goals, again, they match the flexibility of the OODA loop, and they match the I mean, it's in there in the PACT goal of continuity. They match this idea of we've got to be responding continuously to the information that we have available to us. And I think the final part of the toolbox that I'll talk about here is something called PACE, P-A-C-E. So that's how we then build our responses. We have a primary response, we have an alternative response, we have a continuity response, and we have an emergency response to things. And by building 4 potential responses, for a minimum of 4 potential responses to any situation that we can think about, it gives us the resilience, it gives us the adaptability that is often lacking in other management processes or management systems. And really, as part of a training scheme, we're going to go through all of these tools. We're going to see how these tools work, and we're going to apply them to real situations that have occurred or that can be occurring in your business or in whatever it is that you're looking at applying systems thinking processes to. On the nature awareness, that's a very different training. I've developed that through some experiences that I've had taking postgraduate students out into natural spaces, taking communities, groups out into natural spaces, and in training other people to be trackers. And nature awareness, it's much more informal. It's really getting to know your local environment, getting to know your local woods. It's essentially a guided walk. But as we're out there, what we'll do is we'll talk about how the natural environment functions, essentially how it is a complex adaptive system. So we'll look at the processes, we'll look at things like secondary ecological succession, we'll look at what biodiversity means, we'll look at indicators of energy and nutrient flows through the natural environment. We will hopefully, if the conditions are good, and they're not always great for this, but we'll have a look at how tracking can give you a much closer understanding of things that are happening in the natural world, and how we can see interactions between wildlife that are perhaps missed by people who are expected to see something directly. That if you read the tracks and the science correctly, you can see how things have interacted without actually having to have been there present for the time that it does that. And a key aspect for me in doing that, 2 key aspects really. The first one is what I think is the nature awareness. It's the golden tool. It's the absolute perfect way of experiencing nature, is to understand how just sitting quietly in nature, we call it sit spot, how sitting quietly in nature for 20 minutes can completely transform your awareness and your understanding of what's taking place in the natural world. And we'll talk you through how you can use time spent sitting quietly in a space like this and just reach out with your senses to experience all sorts of stuff that's going on in the natural world. And the other one is the value of a tree, particularly the silver birch tree is the one that I like to focus on. It's the most common tree, so almost any wild space in the UK that you go to, you're going to have a collection of silver birch. There's surrounded by them here, 2 or 3, just the other side of the camera. And when we look at that, we look at how it has, that tree in particular has formed human history and the progress of human civilization, how vital it was before we developed agriculture, how vital it is to the environment now as an early stage tree during the succession process, how its short life means that it's through its death it contributes nutrients to later stages of environmental succession, and how it is an incredible natural resource. Just a single tree is an incredible natural resource for humans, for tools that we can make, for it has medicinal uses, there are food uses from certain aspects of the tree. So we'll have a look at that's just one tree, and you can apply similar thinking across the entire woodland. So that's the sort of thing that we talk about in our nature awareness course. The way regenerative landscaping works is there is a strong focus on something called PNV, potential natural vegetation. And essentially what that is it's as we go through the process of ecological succession, the climate stage of ecological succession, for a woodland like this, the dominant species at climate stage should be oak, and there should be some beech in here as well, which there is, with a few other shrubs, holly being one of the main shrubs in this area. So that would represent the maximum potential natural vegetation of an area. So if we can develop a landscaping solution where that is the end goal for this area, it's going to mature faster than non-native species or even native species that you wouldn't necessarily find in this area. Certainly you can grow things like Scots pine in this area, but it's not optimum for them to grow here, so they will struggle compared to a collection of local native species. So the first thing in that is there's much more rapid maturation of that environment. It becomes self-sustaining much quicker. As part of that process, it's attracting wildlife, and wildlife that should be, again, native to the area, native pollinators and local native pollinators, native bird species, which contribute to the biodiversity and contribute to developing not just that landscape, but the landscapes that specific area are connected to through wildlife corridors. So taking this approach, it builds something that is essentially should be there. That you've got to think of what this landscape is doing is it's fast forwarding what would happen if there was no human involvement in that area. If we just left a patch of ground to do its own thing, it would eventually develop to the sort of landscapes that we are looking at developing. But that process under natural circumstances could take anything from 50 to 200 years. What we're going to do is try and get that done in somewhere between 5 and 20 years, depending on the scale and the scope of the project. So for a community-based project, we might look at that being something that takes place over 5 years or so. I don't believe in standard solutions to environmental problems, and I think by taking the approach that we do, we look specifically to what that client needs. That client, where they're based, and what they do as a business, it's going to be completely unique to them. Every decision that everyone makes is going to be based in a combination of three different areas. It's going to be a social decision, it's going to be an economic decision, or it's going to be an environmental decision. Ultimately, when you kind of boil down to the foundation of what those decisions are. And the social, the environmental and the economic needs for every single client are going to be unique. Now, we can probably look at a situation where most clients are going to want to look at their waste management. Most clients are going to want to look at how they, what their water usage is or what their energy usage is. They're going to look for recycling solutions. But that doesn't mean that everyone is going to have a standard solution that's appropriate to those. So we customize that service by taking a real deep dive into what that client needs and what their environment is like. and really build the solution for them from the ground up. And it doesn't mean that there aren't aspects of that could be standardized. Certainly if we were looking at energy management, of course we're going to look at things like solar as a renewable option. That's not going to be appropriate to every client, so I'm not going to say for every client in an area, right, for your energy needs what you need to do is use solar as your renewable energy source. So it's really about looking what is it unique about this client and what is unique about their needs, what's unique about the environment that surrounds them, those environmental needs, and building a picture from that to develop that solution from. So no standard services, that's essentially how we customize things for each client. We don't like the idea of a standard service that applies to everything, because it simply can't. The environment is too complicated for us to apply one solution across multiple.